Has it started? Oh,
BR Lives.
okay. Thank you. So yeah, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Welcome to this event hosted by students of the Jindal School for Environment and Sustainability. This is just going to be a 1 hour long student panel discussion where we talk about climate anxiety for World Environment Day. So with that said, let's get started. So the foundation here is that global heating, sea level rise, and more frequent and intense extreme weather events, they don't happen in a vacuum. The human consumption of resources has been out of control for decades, and these unsustainable attitudes and behaviors regarding the environment have come at a dire cost, which is why we're all here today. And Earth essentially faces a triple planetary emergency, which is the climate is heating up too quickly for people and nature to adapt. Habitat loss and other pressures mean an estimated 1 million species are threatened with extinction, and three, which is pollution, comes to poison our air, land, and water. And the way out of this dilemma is to transform our economies and societies to make them inclusive, fair, and more connected with nature, or to follow an ecocentric approach. And we must shift from harming the planet to healing it. So, led by the United Nations Environment Programme, or UNEP, and held annually on the 5th of June since 1973, World Environment Day is the largest global platform for environmental public outreach, and it is celebrated by millions of people across the world. And this year it was hosted by Sweden, the physical event, and the overarching theme was Only One Earth. This was the slogan for the first UN conference on the human environment as well, held in Stockholm in 1972. And this put sustainable development on the global agenda and led to the establishment of World Environment Day. And 50 years later, Sweden is hosting Stockholm Plus 50 from the 2nd to the 3rd of June, and World Environment Day, which is today. And time is running out. Nature is in emergency mode, and to keep global warming below 1.5 degrees Celsius this century, we must have annual greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. Without action, exposure to air pollution beyond safe guidelines will increase by 50% within the next decade, and plastic waste flowing into the aquatic ecosystems will nearly triple by 2040. So more than 150 countries are hosting environmentally themed events today. This is part of the annual celebration. But I think more than a celebration, it is kind of an event to put some more spotlight and really showcase and highlight what's happening to this planet. And I think that's why we are all here as GSCS students as well, to kind of take this on, because we have to think of it as if we don't do it, who else will? So the underlying theme of World Environment Day is that it's not too late to repair the damage humanity has done. But to do that, people need to make environmentally conscious decisions. Financial institutions need to contribute to the transition to a greener and safer future, and politicians must see beyond election cycles to intergenerational wins. And one of the most, I think, famous quotes of World Environment Day is that it began in 1972, which stands at a critical juncture today. And it is, like I said, now or never. So moving to today's event, exploiting our planet for product and wealth, creating a climate catastrophe, driving species to extinction and polluting our land, seas and airs. The web of life is fraying, and if it fails, we as species will fail too. Climate change is also being dubbed the sixth mass extinction event, which is quite worrying. The science is clear as per many scientific reports, and time is running out, and we must go from harming our planet to healing it. Humanity has come together before to prevent environmental catastrophes. We have helped repair the ozone layer. Let those victories be the torches that ignite more action and illuminate the path to a world in which we are once again at peace with nature. So this year, to celebrate World Environment Day, the Jindal School of Environment and Sustainability, which is us, is holding this virtual student panel discussion on climate anxiety, which we'll get to know more about in this panel, and what we can do about it. Just for some foundational knowledge, and this will be elaborated on later by one of the students, climate anxiety is an aspect of a wider phenomenon called eco-anxiety. And this encompasses challenging emotions to dealing with significant environmental issues and the threats that they pose. And on a wider scale, both eco-anxiety and climate anxiety are components of a phenomenon in which the state of the world impacts our mental health. So with that being said, I think we should get started with the panel. And also, if anybody has any questions that they'd like to ask on the YouTube live stream as well, there's a chat and we have somebody monitoring this chat. So please feel free to ask any questions and we'll be sure to answer them. So on the panel, we have Aparna from the 2020 batch of JSES. We have Ashrita from the 2020 batch. We have Deeti from the 2021 batch and Jashant from the 2021 batch as well. And I am Himant Singh Bakshi from the 2020 batch as well. And let's get started. So I think the first thing that we want to, Ashrita, I'm going to come to you first. I think the first thing that people might be wondering or thinking about is what is climate anxiety? This might be the first time they've heard of it. So could you maybe talk to us about that and what it encompasses?
Okay, so good evening, everyone. So basically, when you talk about climate anxiety, like Himmat mentioned, it's also called as eco-anxiety, is the feeling of constant or increased worry of all the ill effects of climate change on our surroundings and the environment, and the impending fear or doomsday or our future is might like face. So climate anxiety is a fairly new concept, and it involves all the happening which revolves around climate change. So when we talk about anxiety related to climate change, we have to define in exact terms with evidence what humans are facing in the past few decades according to human awareness. This has been given ample evidence of global warming, depletion of ozone layer, earthquakes, unforeseen floods, melting of polar ice caps, all of which is amounting to loss of property and death. All of this further amounting to apprehension or anxiety, not only to scientific world, but also to common man. So this anxiety is causing awareness within the countries and also at a global level, which is setting a stage of discussion and forums at various levels. This is leading to be a common discussion and a common talk in households, offices, and also causing debates in classrooms. It can be said that human anxiousness is directly proportional to human intellect, meaning to say that people who are aware are more prone to climate anxiety. So in order to understand climate anxiety and the resulting anxiety, we have to understand the evidence supporting it. So nature works in a large cycle of time. This evidence is not seen in a few years or decades. The result of calamity may be evident in 50 to 100 years. So talking about the history and or the past events, in studies done or in specimens taken in the ice core found a few kilometers under the Earth's surface, almost 240,000 years ago, showed evidence of climate change in different ecological, geological eras. So this shows that climate change has been occurring, but awareness has been ignited recently. Global warming has been a cyclic process occurring since many years. So starting from global warming has been, so it's been a cyclic process. So it started from Mesozoic era, that is the age of dinosaurs, followed by the cooling era of Ice Age. Atmospheric debris contains carbon particles deposited each year in the ice in Antarctica, and it gets embedded in the in an annual pattern. This data has been found tracing back to 240,000 years, which has been evident looking at the isotope carbon dating records. This shows that our 4.5 billion year old Earth is not new to climate change. So though the human existence has been found only 2 lakh years back, and the awareness about climate change is only 7 to 8 decades back. Even though the first discovery of climate change was done in 1896, it was totally scientific and scientist level. So the common man or general public had no clue or couldn't care less about it.
I see. So thank you for kind of laying out this kind of foundation knowledge of climate anxiety, which will help kind of transition and set us up for the rest of the questions. And I think something you said was about the kind of the fear, the anxiety of having to deal with it ourselves. And actually, in our course or throughout our classes, we've been learning about sustainable development, which at least the most common understanding is that it's developing with using resources for development, but also leaving enough for future generations. And I think that's why it's climate anxiety is something felt by the younger generations, but we'll also talk about this. But yeah, it's felt by the younger generations because it's up to us to kind of make sure that future generations, our children and our children's children, make sure that they aren't in like a deficit or there's no compromise there. So thanks for Shweta for that. Jashant, I want to come to you now. So we're talking about climate anxiety, and could you maybe give us some insight as to who is affected by climate anxiety?
First of all, good evening. So the basic answer would be everyone actually, because as Ashrita mentioned, the term climate anxiety might be new for us, but then at the end of the day, the phenomena, we are similar with it. With the climate consequences, the unease feeling when we are aware about the climate change and the vulnerabilities, for example, heat strokes or air pollution or water availability and health implications. We all are aware of that. And these are the factors which decide that the degree of severity and the degree of anxiety. So the thing is that climate anxiety doesn't look for age, gender, or background. It's similar for everyone, and everyone will face it. But then what differs is the severity of problems that people are facing, the degree of severity at which people are having anxiety. For example, it may depend from place to place. Some people are more vulnerable to these anxiety problems. For example, people living in an area which is more prone to flood, people living in an area which is more prone to earthquakes, or people from sinking nations, sinking cities. So on the other hand, we have other categories, for example, old people with pre-existing diseases or problems. When a climate change problems come up, a disaster comes up, in terms of evacuation or transportation, they might feel difficulty, they might feel anxious because they have to look after themselves, and at times people are not there to help them. Next, the thing is the migrants, laborers, so working 24/7 in this scorching heat. The thing is that they have to look after their family and they have to look for the future also, because we are not sure what the future holds for them. Secondly, the thing is the people, the children, the youth, the young generation. Because as Ashita mentioned that awareness, because of climate change, people are more aware, and people getting much to know about these problems, these disasters, so that now people are more aware. Apart from YouTube advertisements or social media feeds, articles, we are actually seeing it firsthand. We're getting a firsthand experience. For example, in Jindal itself, people avoid lunch, students avoid lunch, because we know that at 12, it's around 42, 43 degrees Celsius, and students are aware that if you spend too much time outside, you might get heat stroke, you might get dehydration problems. An incident occurred a few weeks back in campus. A severe rainstorm came, although it didn't last long. But then because of the rainstorm, the floodlights in the cricket field fell. Due to that, many trees were uprooted. So just imagine if some people were around that, some stray dog or stray animal was around that, what would have happened? So it creates a sense of fear in us, right? What will happen? What will happen after 10 years? What will happen after 5 years? So these are the factors, and these are the people, older adults, communities of color, the people who are looking forward to migrate, children, low income communities, people like poor people. So the thing is that rich people, they have resources, they can look after themselves, but what about poor communities? Local income families are at risk of physical and mental illness during flooding and in crowded shelter conditions. So therefore, taking all this into consideration, we know that this pre-traumatic anxiety, if you have to take it in a positive manner and concentrate all the strength in finding the solution and start working. Instead of concentrating on like everything, we should start slowly. and then slowly we should gear up and then concentrate on other aspects. That's it.
Thank you for that. Yeah, and I do hope nobody was harmed or injured when the floods were happening. And yeah, I think you raised an important point where it's just a plethora of questions being asked and nobody has the answers yet. But I think it's also important that we're dealing with climate anxiety now, because as the climate change crisis deteriorates and becomes progressively worse, that's when the climate anxiety is going to start surfacing more and it's going to become a lot more relevant. So I do think it's pretty important why we're dealing with this now, and again we're we're highlighting this and showcasing it so that people understand and are aware that something like this exists. So yeah, thank you for that, Jashant. And I'm going to go around the table. So Karan, I'm going to come to you next. I was hoping you could provide us with some insight as to how much it will impact the daily life. Jashant talked about how some people are kind of careful of when they have their lunch, because at 12 o'clock it gets quite hot and you can get dehydrated on campus. So how will it impact the daily life of a common person?
Right. So climate anxiety is something that's constantly affecting our thoughts, and it can also influence people's behaviors. So like Jashant said, people who are living through a disaster, they might develop some kind of trauma or PTSD from living through the disaster. And this way, a chronic anxiety develops regarding future disasters and how they'll be able to cope with that. Now, climate anxiety also leads to solastalgia. Now, this is a new term which is just being used to describe the existential crisis and the loss of identity that people go through when their homes are destroyed by climate change related events. So you can think of this as similar to nostalgia, where people long to visit their past or visit their home. Same way in solastalgia, people are thinking about their homes and how this is going to permanently change in the coming future. So for example, someone's house gets destroyed in a flood and they see the entire city or their village being destroyed by the flood. So they know that their city or village or even their house is never going to return back to the original state. And even if it does, it's going to take a long time to go back to normal. So this feeling of fear, stress, and trauma persists for a long time. And this violation of the security and belonging in a place where people feel safe, that is solastalgia. Now, this is also applicable to people who have not experienced disasters. It's applicable to everyone. Simply living through times where the surrounding environment is rapidly changing, we can see that in our city, green spaces are disappearing. Our country is getting more polluted. Lakes are going dry. Rivers are getting more polluted. We are hearing more about water scarcity, and summers are becoming unbearably hot, like how we all see staying in Jindal. So all this can induce the sense of fear and the existential threat as people realize that this is only going to get worse in the future. Climate anxiety affects people across all ages, but particularly students and young adults. Hearing news about climate change causes distress, and being reminded of it daily through social media and news channels on TV makes climate anxiety a constant fear for many. Government policies that weaken environmental protection or setting emission reduction targets that can only be achieved after 2 or 3 decades, all this causes climate anxiety in students and young people, and they particularly feel betrayed by the government that the government is not doing enough to combat climate change. Now, this is accompanied by feelings of guilt because people also feel that they are not able to do anything to stop climate change from becoming worse. So they feel guilty that they're not doing anything on a personal or a community level. Some people also deprive themselves of basic needs or buying products or services that they genuinely need. So for example, someone might not take a cab even though the destination is not at a walkable distance, or they might not buy new clothes because they're anxious about resource consumption and the waste it will create or the carbon emissions that will be involved. Some also develop eating disorders due to their guilt. So even though it is good to be mindful of resource consumption, it's not good to deprive ourselves of our basic needs. It was also found that some millennials were hesitant to have children because they were worried about how climate change is going to turn or how it's going to turn for the worse in the future. Now, climate anxiety can also worsen mental health for those who already live with mental illnesses. Young people with climate anxiety, some of them are unable to sleep because they spend the entire night thinking about the future of the planet. So, obsessive thinking and panic attacks, these are some of the ways by which climate anxiety affects the daily life of people. Lastly, students like us and young adults who talk about climate change with their peers are sometimes mocked because their friends either lack awareness regarding climate change or consider it to be a trivial topic. So, this further discourages them and stresses them out. I have seen some of my friends. Some of my vegan friends who are made fun of, even though they are not imposing their choice of being vegan on others. And some people, they don't mean any harm, but they casually ask questions like, why don't you just take a flight? Or why don't you just switch on the AC? Now, this increases the hopelessness in people who are suffering with climate anxiety, that even their own friends are not concerned and they further worry about the future. So awareness is very important.
Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, it's unfortunate that some people are making conscious decisions and active decisions to kind of help kind of make a change and maybe deal with this climate anxiety, but unfortunately there isn't enough awareness. And I think you raised an important point as well with you feel like you can't do anything. There's just this feeling of guilt and anxiety in you, and you can't do anything. You're stuck in one place, and nothing's happening. So Deethi, I want to come to you now. We're talking about climate anxiety and this feeling of guilt being in you and stuck in you. So can you maybe tell us about how you can deal with climate anxiety?
Yeah, so there are various ways to deal with climate anxiety. You could start with therapy, but when you talk about therapy, I would start off by saying that climate anxiety itself is not considered as a mental illness, because it falls into a much broader category of eco anxiety. And if climate anxiety intensifies and causes other mental illnesses like general anxiety disorder, or causes panic attacks and other known mental illnesses, that should be considered a more serious threat than what climate anxiety is considered by other people today. So when talking about how therapy can help, we need to first understand what kind of therapy would be used to treat climate anxiety in the first place. So ecotherapy is a newly developed form of therapy that involves interacting with the environment and using the environment, and more doing outdoor activities and having more real practical experiences with the environment to heal and rejuvenate the environment and your feelings as well. So in this case, the environment would be seen as a pillar of support for the person suffering from eco or climate anxiety, and interacting with nature would promote more healing of not just the person but also the environment. In this case, therapists that are aware of climate change and climate action as well can help cope with climate anxiety. Since, as I just mentioned, eco anxiety is fairly new, there is very little data about what kind of strategies would be used to manage anxiety in this through this form of therapy. But there is a separate separate subject of psychology called environmental psychology, where psychologists usually conduct ecotherapy and promote contact with nature, and they have better knowledge of all these environmental concerns in the context of mental health. So, therapy would provide you talking to a licensed professional, which is sometimes better than just talking to other people going through the same thing as you. But talking to people always helps, even if it's not a therapist. Everyone, as Aparna just mentioned, everyone should be aware of climate change and climate anxiety, and everyone hence should be sensitized towards the environment and climate change. Since everyone has different experiences and interactions with the environment, the ways in which climate anxiety would be addressed by people would be very different. If it's not a therapist, sharing feelings with communities nearby, for example, if there is a specific disaster that is affecting or being the source of this anxiety, can talking to those people going through the same thing as you can really help. And otherwise, before I start to list ways to deal with climate anxiety, One thing everyone suffering from climate anxiety needs to realize and remind themselves of is that they are not alone in this fight of climate change. It's something that is addressing communities and people worldwide, and the burden to do something about it and take climate action does not just fall on one person. Having said that, worrying about the future is something that everyone goes through, and worrying about the state and health of our planet as well, um, coming from these environmental concerns that we're facing right now, seems very reasonable, but it should not lead to people, as Aparna also mentioned, depriving themselves of resources that they genuinely need. So everyone should work together to save the world, and every individual should focus on doing their best. And the climate anxiety could be used as a tool instead of just a source of emotions. And there should hence be a sort of shift in the mindset of the people. And the anxiety could be used as motivation. One can be motivated to reduce their ecological footprint in the environment. And like general anxiety, one needs to practice mindfulness, one needs to attempt to calm themselves when they're going through these feelings. Although climate anxiety has a bad connotation, it does make people more aware and sensitizes them because it involves real life experiences and real concerns that people have about the environment that causes them to suffer through these various feelings. Climate action is something that should be a solution to climate anxiety, as it should be seen as motivation. So, action could include sensitizing people, promoting policy changes, taking initiatives yourself, funding or supporting other initiatives, and basically anything that would be used to combat climate change. Although intensified climate change is anthropogenic, we cannot really control how it's represented in our environment. Like in the form of global warming, we cannot really control what's happening to the environment right now. So climate action should be one way that can be seen as how we could control climatic issues and climate change right now. There are also various organizations that provide support to people suffering from climate anxiety, like Climate Cafe, where it's an online forum where everyone talks about their feelings and that stem from climate change in a safe space. And there are licensed professionals that provide help to those suffering. There is a Climate Psychology Alliance that provides various resources for youth, especially, and young adults in this regard. There are also various podcasts that address climate change and this promotes listening to other people's experiences that could sort of feel relatable for those suffering and could be seen as a let out of emotions as well.
Thank you. Yeah, so I think another thing you mentioned was ecotherapy and how it's still like a new concept. So I think as kind of time progresses and unfortunately as the climate change crisis again gets progressively worse, ecotherapy is going to be something that's, spoken more about. And there's this kind of gap in this society where ecotherapy is currently filling in. And another important point is, a lot of people are going through the same thing. Some might have different experiences to others, but climate anxiety is this topic that everybody's becoming aware about. So talking to be it your peers, your friends, or professionals, or they're starting to become more and more professionals who are focusing on ecotherapy. So I think understanding that you have climate anxiety, and then taking a step back, looking at it from a holistic perspective, and finding different ways to deal with it. I think that's also an important point that you raised. So thank you for that. Arshita, I'm going to come back to you. And I was hoping you could kind of maybe shed some light on climate change and, is climate anxiety a good thing or a bad thing? Is it a mix of both, or how does that work?
Yeah, so according to me, I think it's both good and bad. Good for a certain level and bad for a certain level. So anxiety per se is a process of adaptation. So it can be said that it's good when it becomes maladaptive, or when it interferes with your day-to-day life, then it becomes a problem. So anxiety, like I said before, happens because of awareness. So this is a good thing as it makes people aware about this situation and take actions, take positive steps to deal with it, like educating people who are not aware about it, taking precautions of your actions. And but the only thing is that people sometimes can take it in a, like, this can become bad as it clouds your thoughts and it makes you overthink or prevent, or like Aparna said, makes people guilty about their actions, like, and this like prevents them to live a normal life, like you, like people have phobia to perform their day-to-day activities, like maybe they won't, like Aparna mentioned this before, that they won't take a cab because, like, they're like worried about it, that this would also lead to climate change, and this would, so all this thing can be bad and can be good. So that's where I can leave this topic.
Thank you for that. Yeah, so I think while these circumstances may be unfortunate, somebody with climate anxiety may have experienced this disastrous event. I think it could lead to raising a lot of awareness, and it could give us, the students like us, the opportunity to, understand why this person has climate anxiety, how they got climate anxiety, how badly is it affecting them, and how we can treat it. And, I think this can lead to a shockwave of raising awareness and educating people on the climate change crisis, climate anxiety, and anything and everything revolving those two topics. So, Jashant, I'm going to come back to you now. And I was hoping, have you faced or dealt with any personal experiences regarding climate anxiety, how it has affected you as a student of JSES?
To describe my personal experience, I would like to take you all back 3 years back, 2018, Kerala. And in the month of August, it's usually monsoon season there. And that year, it unusually rained very well, like heavily. And as a result, flood. So as a result, 14 districts in the state were like declared emergency, given the red cap status. And more than 500 people lost their life, 100 people were misplaced, and they're still missing. And even like thousands of people evacuated from one place to another. So the thing is that at that time we were at school, so we saw that it was raining very heavily, and there might be a chance that the school officials would declare us holidays. And because we were seeing in the news that they were having landslides in the hilly regions of Kerala, and many people are losing their life, and they isolated the hilly regions there. So as a result, the next day itself, we got holiday, and I went back home. I'm talking to my parents, and then they told me that the water might reach here. The water might cover our land. They might get into our building. And we were really worried, actually. And I really thought one day, maybe tomorrow when I wake up, I might sink in my bedroom. And this was the anxiety and fear that I had. Many people lost their life, calamity, destruction. Many people saw the building flow like in the water from their own eyes, their cars, their buildings. Many people had to spend weeks without water, without food in the terrace. They're waiting for evacuation. They're waiting for choppers. I could see the choppers 24/7, like above, like just 50 meters above, 60 meters above my terrace. And then that sounds of chopper used to give me like, even after the calamity ended, no, people like the army and the military people were like going back. And it used to give me that feeling that it might come again. This flood situation might come again, and we have to face this scenario again, the destruction, calamity, and all. So all these things happened, but at the end of the day, the thing is that people were like brought to safety, disaster relief camps. And in the month of August, we celebrate Onam. So we're like, it was our responsibility to take clothes and then food to feed them and all, to give them clothes and all, material and all. So we conducted cultural activities for them. So the thing is that at the end of the day, we have to take it in a positive manner, and we have to avoid this. The thing is that this thing happened 3 years back, and then again COVID happened, and then again frequent cyclones that's happening now also. So it will happen. It will continue to happen. And the thing is that people are developing shocks. They're developing adjustment disorders. They're having psychological problems. So as per report, even after 2 years, there are people like when they hear the sound of the raindrop, they get aversion towards, they remember what all happened like 3 years back, the flood and all. So many people, like, they were separated from each other, shortage of food, shortage of current, electricity. So all those things come back. So although the government of Kerala like deployed 17,000, 18,000 like physicians, mental health people, like to go and check up on them, give them facilities, give them counseling and all. They even provided children's to have like regular classes and give them classes back. So at the end of the day, yeah, it's going to happen. We cannot stop it. We can just decrease the rate of at which it's happening. And we have to spread awareness. We have to take it in a positive manner and we have to work on it. Yeah, that's it. That is my experience. And when I'm noticing all these things in Jindal also, that similar problems, temperature, rainfall, temperature, like there are students here like who haven't like experienced temperature about 30 degrees Celsius, 35 degrees Celsius. They're finding difficulty here. They're having nosebleeds. And there are students who haven't seen temperature in single digits. What's going to happen next sim? They're anxious. They want to know what will happen. Do they have to like bring do they have to like wear 2-3 layers of clothing? So definitely anxiety will be there, problems will be there, but it's up to us to like control it, work on it. That's it.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I can imagine it's quite daunting when you have this kind of form of like PTSD or in this severe form of anxiety that to the point where if you hear like a raindrop, all of this just flashes in your mind, and it's hard to describe. But I can't imagine what it must feel like for those who actually experienced it. So sorry about that. And yeah, next I'd like to also ask Deeti about your personal experience. How has climate anxiety affected you?
So my personal experience with climate anxiety has not been so intensified. However, I've definitely experienced it. I've noticed like changes in the climate around the world and seeing summers becoming even hotter, seasons completely changing their time spans, reading articles about people's experiences with climate change, learning about climate issues in class, talking, looking at, watching documentaries about climate change. All of these have been the sources of climate anxiety for me. And whenever I'm dealing with it, I try to use the anxiousness and the worry as sort of motivation and a tool for climate action that I feel proves to be more useful for me being a student of environmental studies. And like basically my rule is to use the climate anxiety as a tool and make it useful instead of a source of worries. And this process is made easier because I find it easy to talk to people online that are sharing the same experiences as me, reading their articles and just realizing that I'm not alone and the burden just doesn't fall on me. But in even in my personal life, I try to do as much as I can for the environment, which is all of these actions are a source of the anxiety I feel.
Yeah, thank you about that. And yeah, I think a lot of important points were raised as well. And I can say, at least for my side, so I currently live in Sri Lanka, and it's a clean environment. I live in a rural area, but something that I've kind of been nervous about is when I actually get to campus in August, or when I land in Delhi in July. Something that I'm a bit worried about is the pollution levels. I've heard a lot of people say that's really bad, but I haven't been to India in 5 years, so I'm completely oblivious to how it could affect me. And that's something that kind of changes. Okay, I have to keep wearing a mask outside COVID as well, which is kind of a worrying thing, but I only get to experience it kind of to the fullest once I get there. So and I'd like to now move on and come to Aparna. So I want to ask, how can climate anxiety be addressed at a community level? So we heard that from Jishant that tens of thousands of people were hired to kind of help address the mental health aspects of the impacts after facing the events like that, the cyclones. So how can climate anxiety be addressed at a community level or at a mass level?
Yeah. So, like Diti said, anything and everything you do to mitigate the effects of climate change, that itself is going to help people with anxiety to face the guilt that they're not doing enough. So, what big people can do at a community level is that each locality or each apartment or each gated community, they can make these community action plans where they can organize plantation drives, lake cleanups. So these sort of small things that people do for their community, it helps them feel that they are also a part of making things better for the future. They can set up rainwater harvesting facilities in each building, so they can feel that they are prepared, that when the summer comes, they will be able to manage the water scarcity by harvesting water whenever it rains. And if the government approves of any projects that will cause deforestation, for example, then people can join protests to get the plan revoked. And protests can also help draw attention to existing problems like a polluted river, maybe. So it can draw attention to these problems and help get funding and support for making the river clean, which can again help with climate anxiety, because people witness that, okay, something good is happening in their society. And another point about preparedness, which I got reminded of when Jishan spoke about the Kerala floods, is preparing flood relief kits, first aid kits, evacuation plans, finding empty spaces to set up temporary shelters. So all this can help with the feeling that they are prepared, that when a disaster hits them, they will be safe and they can take some action. So again, awareness campaigns can also help people who are willing to help, but they don't know what to do. So when all age groups take action together, it helps the younger people feel less alienated, that it's not just their age group who is suffering through climate anxiety, but that it's everyone in their community who is facing it, and together they're doing something about it.
Thank you for that. Yeah, you raised a few important points as well, as taking some action to kind of help on the community level. And I can say that at least for from the JSCS students, what we're also planning to do in the coming semester, since many students will be there on campus and it won't be some online, some physical, it's that we're going to start to maybe get some cleanup drives going, or some plantation drives, something to help at least for the JGU community and the JSCS community as well. This is, I think we've been given the task to help spread awareness, to help deal with climate anxiety, to tell people that this exists and this is how we can help you deal with that, or by giving you this kind of sense of accomplishment or achievement to make you think that we are contributing towards saving, or towards we are contributing in the fight against climate change. So I think that's also something that's important. We do have a couple of questions that actually came up in the YouTube chat, and this one, Diti, this is for you. So somebody asks, do our student panelists feel that there are differences between how youth in the global north face these issues versus those in the global south?
Yeah, there definitely is a big climate divide between how these issues are not only faced but also addressed in the global south and global north. So I'll start by stating the basic difference between the two. The global north definitely has more up-to-date technology and has better resources and sort of considered the richer countries, whereas the global south are countries with less uh, not resources but less utilized resources, lesser money, and hence more of their population lives in poverty. In terms of climate change, the main contributors would be some countries like United States, China, and EU that contribute more than more than half of the global emissions. And the ones more heavily impacted are the ones in countries like Africa and Brazil, who contribute probably a total of 4% to the entire emissions. So there is definitely a big divide in how these issues impact, how climate change impacts the global north versus the global south, and hence there's a divide and big difference in how climate anxiety occurs in both these as well.
Thank you for that. Yeah, it's important to understand that those who are contributing the least to climate change are facing the worst experience, and this is not fair. And actually, there is a follow-up question. So accordingly, what steps can people take to deal with the resultant anxiety?
So more international interference should be conducted from organizations like the UNEP, etc. But there is also a big divide in how negotiations are followed between the global north and south, um, and how climate anxiety would be addressed at an international level. So even though the global south is where most of the where climate anxiety is more prevalent, there is very little awareness about what climate anxiety actually is. Hence, people aren't even aware of what they're going through, and hence there are lesser resources for them to depend on in terms of climate anxiety. But more resources of dealing with climate anxiety, like some of the organizations I mentioned before, Climate Cafe and Climate Psychology Alliance, are both from the US. Both of them, whereas more of the climate anxiety occurs in the global south, there is more resources to deal with it in the global north.
Yeah, thank you for that. We do have another question, and Aparna, this one is for you. So you talked about recovering from any disaster taking years and going back to the normal state. Would that be desirable in kind of these conditions?
I think that depends on the severity of the disaster. So if there's a flood that has destroyed the entire city or 2 or 3 cities, then obviously it is going to take years to rebuild that infrastructure. But it's not desirable because seeing their homes and seeing their surroundings in a state of ruin, it's going to worsen the climate anxiety. So that's definitely not desirable. But it's something that can't be helped because recovery does take time. So I think once people with climate anxiety understand that recovery is going to take time and everything is a slow process, they will also be able to adapt to their surroundings better, and they will be able to cope with their anxiety in a much better way.
Yeah, thank you for that. Again, many important points that were highlighted. So yeah, I think we have another question that we can address, which is what support can. So I think something that was highlighted in this panel discussion was that climate anxiety is not restricted to a particular age. However, it can surface a bit more with the youth, with the younger generations, the youth, because they are the ones who are going to be dealing with it for a longer period of time. So what support, and Aparna, this is also for you. What support can adults offer to best serve the needs of the young people who are dealing with climate anxiety?
So firstly, adults can make children and students feel that taking action is not just up to the government or some important person, but that everyone can take action at any level and any age group. So being involved to reassure them that it's not just the young who are concerned about the future can really help young people out. And adults, very importantly, have the power to vote. So voting for the government that has better environment protection policies is definitely something that adults should do. And they can help young students join NGOs and local action groups to be a part of the community action that I mentioned before. And if the children are experiencing extreme effects of climate anxiety like depression or insomnia, then adults can help them enroll in therapy. Then corporates also need to take sustainability measures. So adults who work in these big corporates, they can push for it. That's something they can try to do. And as Diti said, I think this is important, ecotherapy. So teachers can teach about climate change in schools and take students on field trips to local forests. And this can help with climate anxiety because they are not only thinking about the negative effects in the future, but they also start thinking about how they can help to preserve what they're seeing around them. And it's also like healing with nature, as Diti said.
Thank you for that. A few more important points raised, and I do have one more question, which is for you, Prashant. So we are highlighting the difference between the kind of general generations, and then there's the youth, the younger generations. So how is the perspective of young people uniquely significant in this journey, or with respect to climate anxiety?
So I think we pretty much know the answer. It's very significant and it's very unique and it's very important. The point of view by youngsters, because the thing is that who are the most active people on earth? Youngsters. What is common between all of us? We are curious, we are not afraid, we're willing to take action, right? And then we have social media, we have technological support, we have research to back it up. So the thing is that after 10 years or 20 years, the people who are ruling us or leading us will not be there. It will be us who will be leading the current generation or the upcoming generation. And because we are seeing the actions and the reactions that are taking place in our earth, right? We are the aware ones. We are the people. We are the ones who get most anxious, and we are willing to take up actions. So definitely, in terms of significance, yes, it's very unique. Also, we should support each other, be positive. It should take considerate amount of education also, because it's required to like support our what we are saying, what we're doing. We need some evidence also. So like concluding all this, combining all of this, yes, it's very significant, and we have a very important role to play. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that was a very powerful answer, because it is literally up to people of our age to deal with the climate crisis. It's up to us to stand together, stand strong, and put pressure on current governments to kind of take action so that they're not leaving us empty-handed when it's our turn to deal with the climate crisis in the not so distant future. And the education part as well, with the JSCS and the courses that we're all taking, it's important that, the professors that we have, they've done such a good job in laying this solid foundation for us, and they're setting us up to deal properly with the climate crisis. So thank you for those points. And now I'm going to invite Aparna, I'm going to invite you for your concluding remarks as we come to the end of this panel discussion.
So climate anxiety is something that is going to affect more people in the coming days. And we hope that this session helped you all understand climate anxiety better and get some insight on how to cope with it. And it was great to listen to everyone's thoughts. And it was a very interesting discussion for me with a lot of takeaways.
Thank you for that. And Ashrita, you as well, do you have any kind of concluding remarks, any more points to add?
Yeah, so climate change and climate anxiety is a really important topic and a concept. So this should be identified and should, be addressed. We should try and not be anxious about it, and try and take actions by joining labs, awareness camps, and work on this topic together. And yeah.
Thank you for that. So yeah, I think also it's important to know that this is one of the first student-led or student panel discussions that JSCS is doing. And what the students have been doing, at least behind the scenes, is we've been marking days on the calendar, saying here are some important environmental dates and days and weeks as well. And it's up to us to raise awareness about these specific topics. So I think there's also a lot to look forward to those as well. So I'd like to conclude this panel discussion by saying thank you to all the panelists for kind of setting up, all the viewers or people watching live with us, setting up a foundational general knowledge of what climate anxiety is, what the climate crisis is doing to us, and how it's affecting us. And I hope, I encourage everybody to do some more research as well after this, to learn more about it. And if you have any questions, we're all in the same university, you can feel free to get in touch with us, and we'll be sure to help you to the best of our ability. So on that note, thank you all very much. Thank you once again to the panelists. Thank you to the entire team. And yeah, have a good one.